All right, folks, today is September 19th, 2018. This is Roland Martin Unfiltered. Coming up on the show, Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr., he says the Laquan McDonald case is the most heinous crime since the murder of Emmett Till. We'll give the update on that trial in Chicago. Also, the electronic door locks in the home of Botham John could hold the key as to what took place when Amber Geiger shot and killed him. Also, two ministers in Dallas, one white, one black, speak about the death of John from their pulpits on Sunday. Wait until you hear what they have to say. We'll be joined right here by Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence. Of course, she is from Detroit. We'll be talking about the lack of a federal investigation into Donald Trump and FEMA's response to Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. Also, Lee Saunders, president of AFS-CME, known as AFSCME, is here to break down what is at stake for workers, the working class, in this year's midterm election. Also, we're all-female panel on the show talking about, of course, the Brett Kavanaugh hearing. And yesterday, a lot of you were interested in when I said I don't give a damn what folks have to think. And some of you even went on YouTube and said, well, if you don't think so, why do you wear expensive suits? I got something to say to y'all about that on today's show. It's time to bring the funk of Roland Martin Unfiltered. Let's go.
He's got it. Whatever the miss, he's on it. Whatever it is, he's got the scoop, the fact, the find. And when it breaks, he's right on time. And it's rolling. Best believe he's knowing. Putting it down from sports to news to politics. With entertainment just for kicks, he's rolling. It's on go, y'all. It's Roland Martin, yeah. Rolling with Roland now. He's funky, he's fresh, he's real, the best, you know he's Roland Martin now. Martin!
Unlike the broadcast networks and cable news shows, every single day we will be focusing on the Laquan McDonald case out of Chicago, giving you the update in terms of what is going on. Remember, we're now operating, the testimony today was dominated by a shot description of the wounds to McDonald's body, including metal fragments stuck in his teeth. Yes, of course, remember, it was Officer Jason Van Dyke who was on trial for murder in the case of McDonald. He is on trial outside of the courtroom today. Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr., of course, he spoke about the shooting death of McDonald and said it is the most heinous crime in America since the murder of Emmett Till.
This must be a case that defines justice for us in this city and across our nation. The most heinous crime since the lynching of Emmett Till. But we intend to be witnesses every day until there is a resolution.
All right, folks, also another case that we're keeping you updated on, that is the case of Botham Jean, the brother who was shot and killed by Dallas police officer Amber Geiger. Of course, the data stored in Jean's door may hold the key to whether or not the officer who killed him told the truth about what happened. She said she mistakenly went to the wrong apartment, found the door open, saw Jean, though he was shot, thought he was an intruder and shot and killed him. But then she gave a previous testimony where she said she had issues when it comes to unlocking the door. Now, the doors that they were used there automatically closed. And so if you saw the video that was on social media, those doors don't stay open. Literally, when they're open, it automatically closes unless somebody is holding it. Also, because of those particular locks, they actually are electronic locks, and they're able to get the data that is inside of those locks. And Dallas police, they've already captured the data from Jean's door and Amber Geiger's door. And that data, again, could very well tell exactly what happened. So we'll keep you tuned to that. Now, of course, there's been a clergy reaction to this. You've had a number of black pastors who have been protesting as a result. We had Reverend Dr. Frederick Douglass Haynes on the show on Monday. Well, in the pulpit, a couple of pastors talked about this. Several pastors did. And want to show you the video. One pastor, one who's white, one pastor is black, about this. First up is Concord Baptist Church Pastor Brian Carter. He said that, look, black folks can't always trust a system when it comes to when one of us is shot and killed by a cop.
Friends, I came by to tell you this is going to be a long process. This is just the beginning of the process. There's still a grand jury that's going to come. There's still a trial. This is going to be a long process. Somebody this week tried to say to me, we have to learn how to trust the process. And I said, that's easy for some to say. When you run the process, you built the process, you own the process, and you've benefited from the process. People that look like me, we don't trust the process. The process ain't been good to us. Process put us in the back of the bus. Process gave us inferior educations. Process kept us out of certain jobs. Process kept us out of certain schools. Process gave us longer sentences. Process gave us hardship crime. Process treated us wrong. Process profiled us before we were walking down the street. Process ain't been good to the people that look like me. So it's hard for me to trust the process. Process has been bad to me a long time. So it's hard to trust the process.
Now, yesterday we also showed you Pastor George Mason of the Wilshire Baptist Church in Dallas speaking out on the racism or the racism inherent in the treatment of Botham John and the cop who shot him. Here he is talking about what happened when a group of black pastors met with white pastors to talk about Botham John, and among those pastors was Brian Carter, also Bishop T.D. Jakes of the Potter's House in Dallas.
One black pastor thanked the white pastors for being there, but expressed frustration with what he called the way white churches have privatized the gospel so much so that it keeps our congregations from understanding that the call for justice is not optional for Christians. And he wondered why we don't speak out more. We leave it to them. They're on their own. Bishop Jakes talked about how hard it is convincing the black youths in his church to stay with the Christian way of following a nonviolent Jesus when they're hearing lots of things from other people who say that's not getting us anywhere, and a culture that's dominated by white preaching that is continually defending policies that are rooted in white supremacy and racism. He says, I believe you care because you're in this room, but we need to know more than where your heart is. We need to hear you say clearly in your pulpits and in the streets that white supremacy and racism is wrong, and no more generalizations. I know it will cost you something to do so, but isn't that what Jesus calls us all to do? To deny ourselves, take up our cross, and follow him? It is. And psst, it's not just preachers. If we want to call ourselves by the name of Jesus, we have to stop defending things Jesus would condemn.
You can tell the difference between the black church and the white church. That one was mighty quiet compared to what happened with Pastor Brian Carter. And so we will certainly be keeping you updated on this case as well. And again, one of the reasons why we have Roland Martin Unfiltered is because cable news networks and others don't necessarily cover our stuff the way we do and the way it should be done. Speaking of that, folks, joining me right now on our set is Lee Saunders. He, of course, is the president of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. We've got, of course, huge election coming up in the midterms, and we have seen lots of decisions by our court system, including the Supreme Court, in terms of their impact on unions as well. And so we want to talk to him about that. And also, and as we said before, asked me as one of our underwriters of this show, so we want to thank them for their support and understanding the importance of having different voices. And Lee, first of all, for the people out there who ain't never heard AFSCME, because they might have seen signs and stuff like that, tell exactly what is AFSCME.
Well, we're called the American Federation of State, County, Municipal Employees, AFSCME for short. We represent public service workers all across the country, 1.6 million. Those jobs include sanitation workers, doctors, teachers' aides, home care workers, hospital workers, Department of Transportation, corrections, you name it in the public sector. We represent those workers all across the country. We've been around since 1932 fighting for working families, fighting for our members, but also working families all across this country, and we continue to do so. And
one of the things that we were seeing now, of course, that is the role that labor plays in elections, because whether we're talking about what happens in D.C., what happens in state capitals, well, city government and county government, there are decisions made that impact labor, that impact those workers by politicians.
They impact on retirement security, those decisions, health care security, wages paid, minimum wage laws, collective bargaining, having a seat at the table for our members so they can negotiate wages and working conditions. All of those things are under attack right now. There was a recent Supreme Court decision which essentially made the entire public sector across this country right to work, meaning that folks don't have to be members of the union, yet they receive the same level of benefits that members receive. Under law, they receive the same level of benefits. There is an attempt by the very conservative, by the corporations, very wealthy and very rich, to take advantage of working families across this country. And they don't want to hurt us. They want to take us out of the ballgame because unions represent the counterforce. Unions represent the ability for workers to stand together and fight for better wages, benefits, and working conditions. And we're under attack right now.
So here's what's interesting. And so I gave a speech on Friday to the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 18 in Los Angeles. And it was very interesting because there were individuals who were in that room who were Donald Trump supporters. Mm-hmm. And it was very uncomfortable for some of them, having listened to what I had to say, because I said, how on one hand can you have folks who are ardent supporters of Donald Trump, who claims that he is speaking for the forgotten, for the working class, and literally has policies that go against those very people? How do you deal with folks who literally are voting against their own economic interest?
I think you've got to deal with issues. And we've got to get back to basics, meaning the labor movement and our allies across the country. And the way that you do that is to knock on doors, talk to people individually, talk to them about the importance of the issues that affect them, their families, and their communities, talk to them about involving themselves in the electoral process and the political process, and making a statement and sticking with the issues every single day. If you do that and take the personalities out of it, then you attract folks, and they want to discuss with you what the issues are. They want you to listen to what they have to say. So it's really getting back to basics for the entire labor movement. It's really getting back to basics for our progressive partners as far as knocking on doors, talking to people, and most importantly, listening to what they've got to say.
But you have this divide because you have these largely white men in Ohio, in Wisconsin, in Michigan, who fell for Donald Trump's support or his attacks against NAFTA. And then you have, and then of course you have Republicans who love to be surrounded by police chiefs, and so you have their support of police unions. But then so they love those unions, but then there are other union workers who they despise, and so you sort of have these competing interests. So when you say the labor movement, I mean, you got folks who are appealing to different constituencies in the labor movement.
Well, their game is to divide and conquer, and they were able to do that in 2016. And it's up to us to reconnect with all of those workers. Now, let me be honest with you. We will not get every single worker who voted for Donald Trump. That's not going to happen. They'll vote for him again. But I do believe that if we undertake what we're doing and talking with folks, dealing with the issues, whether it's collective bargaining rights, whether it's labor rights, civil rights, human rights, retirement security, health security, the unfair system that exists with taxes where the wealthy are really getting so much more than working families across the country. If you stick with those issues, you'll be able to pull some of those folks back because they get it and they understand it.
One thing I also said in my speech Friday was that I believe that one of the mistakes that labor makes is that in terms of how messaging takes place. And what I mean by that is, so when you talk about the workers you represent, for a lot of African Americans folks may not realize that for the most part, when you talk about African Americans who are making six-figure salaries, a significant portion of that is coming from government jobs. And so when you have folks who say smaller government, What they don't realize is when you start having those layoffs in school districts, by the city, by the county, by the state, by the federal government, that's a disproportionate impact on black folks because we don't have the same level of access of high-paying jobs in corporate America as we do when it comes to governmental jobs. That's
exactly right. And if you look at the public sector, you look and see that, in fact, that has been the way in which black and African-American families can move into the middle class, having public service, strong public service jobs, and those jobs are represented by unions. 35% in the public sector, those jobs are represented by unions. I can tell you a personal story. I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio. In Ohio, in Cleveland, you had 3 industries where African Americans could move into the middle class for the most part. One was being a bus driver. My dad was a bus driver, proud member of the Amalgamated Transit Union. The second was with the post office. Okay, unionized jobs that could move you into the middle class. And in Cleveland, the third were the mills, the steel mills and rubber mills that existed back then. Again, strong unions. So that was the way in which African-American families, because they had a seat at the table, could negotiate about wages and benefits, and they could move into the middle class because their wages were improved. And not only members of unions, but it has an impact on folks that aren't members of unions because they sometimes get the benefits of union representation, even though they may not be members, through that negotiating process. That is what's under attack right now. And that's what we've got to convince not only our members, but working families across the country to be involved. This is a movement moment for us. You can see 62% of Americans believe that unions are necessary in this country. They understand what we've been able to achieve for workers across this country. But you have other movements that are coming together. The women's movement, the communities of color coming together, and they're saying that enough is enough, and we're making our voices heard and we're fighting back. And we've got to carry that momentum into the elections in November.
Last question, this I Am 2018 initiative, this movement, you began it at MLK 50 in Memphis. What is it going to entail in the next 50 days leading to the election?
Well, we're reconnecting with targeted communities across the country through digital campaigns, through social media, so we can talk about the issues that impact on communities of color, so we can engage them in conversation and they can engage their communities in conversation and talk about the importance of fighting back, the importance of voting in November, and then carrying it on, because we just don't want it to end in November. We want this movement and this movement moment to continue after November in our communities, so we deal with the issues that confront all of us.
Now, this is actually the last question. How afraid are you of a Brett Kavanaugh being on the Supreme Court, especially after the Janus decision earlier this summer?
Well, we're fighting every single day to hopefully that does not happen, because he would just be another Supreme Court justice that would represent the wealthy and the corporations and ignore working families across the country. So we're making phone calls. Our members are making phone calls. Our coalition partners are making phone calls into those states, urging senators to reject that nomination.
All right, Lee, we appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Good seeing you, man.
All right, thanks so much.
Okay.
All right, folks. One of the issues, first of all, today, again, Donald Trump is actually in North Carolina with a response to Hurricane Florence, still being impacted. Huge issues there when it comes to flooding, but he cannot get away with what happened with Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. And the question is, why hasn't the federal government, why hasn't Congress had any hearings to examine what took place with FEMA? We just found out that millions of bottles of water were left on a runway in Puerto Rico. We're joining us now is Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence from Detroit. She sits on the Government Oversight Committee. She joins us right now. And Congresswoman, glad to have you in Roland Martin Unfiltered.
I'm so glad to be here. My first time on your show, so I'm very happy to be here.
So we see this photo, these millions of bottles on a runway in Puerto Rico. You have Donald Trump, who is saying, oh, I didn't get enough credit for what happened there. He's disputing nearly 3,000 people dying as a result of that hurricane. And I just don't there's no way in the world there could be President Barack Obama and Hurricane Maria happen in Puerto Rico and there not be any hearings taking place.
You know, this is a message we're trying to get across to all of America. Elections have happened. So on government oversight, which I sit, there is a dire need for us to investigate and find out what happened, what didn't happen. But because we have a majority Republican Party, the chair of that committee refused to hold a hearing on what has happened. we have repeatedly questioned and brought up the need to find out so it won't be replicated, so we can hold accountable those who did not do their job. And if there's more resources needed or us to revamp processes, we can find out by an investigation. But Trey Gowdy, who is the chair of the committee, has refused to do that. So here we sit now in another crisis, and instead of holding accountable our government, which I know I'm elected to do by the people, is to take care of the American people, uphold my oath to serve, protect, and here we sit again, making excuses or really covering and protecting the president who has repeatedly failed to do his job.
And what we're seeing, of course, we're now seeing white conservative evangelicals. They want to now press their people to say Democrats can take control of Congress after the midterm elections. And then Donald Trump has already said, Republicans have already said, they have a list of all of these different things that have happened, and Democrats will launch investigations. But the reality is there should be investigations. I mean, how do you call it an oversight committee if you have no oversight? And anybody with half a brain could see that what happened in Puerto Rico by FEMA needs to have some type of oversight to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Exactly. And so many people try to demonize investigations by saying it's a witch hunt. But investigations reveal the truth. And if investigations will reveal, did we have enough resources? Is our government functioning the way we intended? If it's not, then we need to take action and make changes that we have throughout this and make sure our government is operating the way it should. Clearly, I don't care how you try to put the number on the amount of people who died in Puerto Rico, we as a government did not handle that situation well, and we have some work to do.
Last question for you. Obviously, there continues to be the drama on Capitol Hill on the Senate side when it comes to Brett Kavanaugh, the woman who has accused him of trying to rape her in high school. She now says she will not testify. She believes there needs to be an FBI investigation before she does that publicly. Republicans are saying absolutely not. She needs to simply testify on Monday. What do you believe should happen?
I really understand, and I feel for Dr. Ford here. So this is the thing. Any woman or any individual who survives the trauma of sexual assault should be heard. I believe strongly, I said it during the Kanye situation, that you should investigate. You should understand and respect when there's an allegation, but you should investigate it, because accountability can't happen if you don't investigate. So now, if we have a hearing on Monday, he's going to give his statement, she's going to give hers. So who is the determining factor on who's telling the truth? So what I hear is that an FBI investigation, who are by law hired and in place to investigate crimes and allegations of crime. If there is an investigation, those facts will be able to be presented. I understand that. And so here we are in a situation where we're saying a judge who have a lifetime appointment, unlike the judge who's sitting in office now, that Clarence Thomas, where women all over this country felt like we were ignored and that we were minimized based on the fact that all men valued his statement over the woman. We should not repeat that. And I feel an investigation is definitely warranted, or else pick another judge to go through the nomination process.
All right, Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence, we certainly appreciate it. Thank you so very much for joining us. All right, folks, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, they have been very outspoken when it comes to not confirming Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. They have now released a video done by John Legend urging senators not to vote for him. Here it is.
Who becomes the next Supreme Court justice is the decision of a lifetime, your lifetime. Brett Kavanaugh's troubling views on the issues that matter most and his rushed confirmation process make him unfit for a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court.
A court that decides how safe I'll be.
That will decide if I can vote.
A court that decides where we can learn and how I am treated.
That will make decisions about how I can control my body.
A court that will decide
if our family will stay together.
That will decide if I have the right to stand up to my boss.
A court that will decide if I get equal pay.
or how much care I deserve.
This fall, your senators will vote on Kavanaugh. How they vote will impact you for a lifetime. Tell them to vote no on Kavanaugh. Remember, they answer to you. To stop Kavanaugh, call your senators at 202-224-3121 or visit justice2018.org for more info.
All right, folks. So let's hear what our panel has to say about that. Joining us right now is Liz Copeland. She's the founder and president of the Urban Conservative Project. Lauren Victoria Burke, political analyst and writer for NBC Black, and Julianne Malveaux, economist and president emerita at Bennett College. So, all right, folks. So what do you think about not only that video, but also all the drama we're still hearing? This woman saying, look, there should be an FBI investigation. Of course, the gentleman who she said was in the room when it happened, he now says, I am not going to testify. And so, Liz, what should happen? Because as of now, she's not going to testify on Monday, and Kavanaugh will.
Yeah, so as President Trump is looking at this, he has to be thinking that white women were one of the reasons why he got into office. I mean, he polled
the big reason, 53% of white women voted for Donald Trump.
Yeah, and it was like 42% for Hillary Clinton, who, it goes without saying, is a white woman. But I think as a Republican, I'm looking at this and I'm comparing the way that the Republican Party is responding to Dr. Ford and the way the Republican Party responded and supported Anita Hill. And when you look at no, they didn't. That's the problem. And so I'm not only seeing an issue of gender, and there being clearly, you know, I don't want to have any victim blaming, but there seems to be this reoccurring theme within the Republican Party, especially when it's coming down from evangelicals, that, you know, Brett Kavanaugh is a really good person, and because you're a Republican, you should support him. But we should follow the facts, and we should let the facts take us to a conclusion. Dr. Ford has already said she's not going to show up on Monday. She wants the FBI investigation. The FBI investigated Anita Hill's claims, and they did so in 3 days. If this president truly wanted to support the women that helped him get into office, if he wanted to take a stand and say that he wants to make sure that everything is done above board, he would open up an FBI investigation.
But he hates the FBI. He's trashed the FBI all week. He blistered his own attorney general today by saying, I don't even have an attorney general. Yeah. I mean, he wants to decimate the FBI because for him, it's not about justice. It's about Russia.
Yeah, he hates to have the FBI until his Supreme Court nominee is in trouble. And they perceive that perhaps they could maybe be helped by that. I don't know. My thing is, I think Brett Kavanaugh, obviously the Me Too movement is important, and a long overdue movement that should have happened a long time ago, to say the least. We know men are typically in power and in control in most office situations, but I have to say I am a believer in due process. I like the idea of an investigation before the hearing. I don't think it's going to happen.
Oh, it's not going to happen.
But, you know, one of the things that you have to think about, I think, for the Republicans is, you know, they have that all-male lineup on the Senate Judiciary hearing.
13 men.
Starts out with Orrin Hatch.
One second.
Starts out with Orrin Hatch, Cornyn, Chuck Grassley, and Ted Cruz. These are our first questioners. You don't get to Senator Sassa until you get to somebody who's sort of a younger senator. I think that's hugely problematic optics for them. Mark Judge, the fact they don't want Mark Judge to testify tells you something, too. He has a book where there's a Bart O'Kavanaugh in the book. That would indicate that there's an inference there. There was a friend with a similar name and a similar story. They don't want to testify because you're under oath now. You're not talking to the press. Right. You can lie. That's why he put out that statement through his attorney, right, that I'm not going to say this and I'm not going to do that. When you put that hand in the air and perjury is in play, you've got a slight problem. And I think that's why they don't want to see Mark Judge.
You know, when Anita Hill was put on the spot, I was one of the 100 or so folks who signed a piece, African-American Women in Defense of Ourselves. There were over 100 of us who took out an ad in the New York Times and the Amsterdam News to talk about black women supporting black women. I want to see white women do that for for this woman, this professor who has an impeccable reputation. Here's the other thing I want to know. How did Brett Kavanaugh and his folks know to get 65 women to sign a letter before you even know that there were some female problems, if you will? They knew what was going on and they knew what was going down. Dianne Feinstein is my senator, to the extent that I consider myself still a Californian, and love her dearly. I think she mishandled this. I think that she should have moved it much more quickly. However, the FBI sent the letter that she sent to them to the White House.
Right.
So they did know that something was going on.
Right.
The 45 does not care whether or not someone is a sexual harasser. That makes them members of the club. But women around the country are not going to put up with that. So the question is just whether or not we're going to end up with 2 sexual predators on the Supreme Court as opposed to the one that we already have.
And you have potentially a sexual harasser nominating another sexual harasser, but we don't really know that without an investigation. And even though I'm not a big fan of Brett Kavanaugh, I do believe strongly in due process.
I believe in due process too. I believe in due process also, but the fact is that this is something that they have deliberately hidden, and so you can't have due process when you don't have due.
How do we know?
Don't have due?
How do we know that they've deliberately hidden anything?
We know that the FBI sent the Feinstein letter.
But Dr. Ford didn't want to be revealed, and so that was the hesitation of the FBI.
But still, you have a letter.
Then the Senate and the President.
But Anita Hill didn't want to be revealed either.
But when
Anita Hill was brought out,
and
she did not sign up. She was brought out. She was sitting in her classroom at whatever the university she was in Oklahoma, minding her own self business. When the FBI came and said, "We are investigating," she didn't volunteer for that.
She was vilified,
so no woman
and
will
Senator
Biden.
Well, he was in charge of that committee at that time.
I don't know about that.
Well, Stormy Daniels, but what are you talking about?
I think your point is well taken. We have an accuser who doesn't want to come out, and also Miss Ford, Dr. Ford, did not know who the nominee was going to be. So I get her hesitation. She was sort of waiting to see, is the guy that allegedly did this to me?
Right, and Donald Trump had a list. Hold on. In 2012, when she did not name him, but she talked about exactly what took place.
Right.
To your particular point, Kavanaugh's name was not on the list. The list, during the election, he weighed the list of 25 names the Federalist Society gave him they wanted to be on the Supreme Court. He wasn't on the list. Kavanaugh's name was added to the list, and in fact, Mitch McConnell told him
not to
don't nominate Kavanaugh because as a long first of all, not
because of sexual assault, but because of the torture.
No. I don't necessarily know that because here's the problem. That letter, her letter, Feinstein had that letter in May, June?
July.
Okay, July.
Right.
So he gets named, and McConnell's saying, this guy, look, he's a long paper trail. It's going to be a problem. We don't know what McConnell knew early on, but the bottom line is his name wasn't on that initial list. Trump really put him on the list because of his views on protecting a president.
He bought his pardon. It's like if like this girl in Dallas, if she could pick her own jury, she would pick her daddy. And that's literally what Trump did with picking Kavanaugh. He picked somebody who he knew was going to be sympathetic to him.
I want everyone to keep in mind that we have a Supreme Court term that begins October 4th.
And they want him
on there.
And that's why all this nonsense about the 11th hour.
Right.
No, it's not. You actually don't have to rush it because clearly when it came to Merrick Garland, they had no problem waiting 230 days for an election to hold a seat open. So let's not act like, so all this, that's why I don't want to hear Mitch McConnell. I don't want to hear this crap about Democrats are not following proper order. I mean, this SOB has not followed order across the board. So there is no order.
But to your point, I mean, I don't think anyone can say definitively that they really believe that the Republicans are going to lose the Senate. So if we can wait, Republican Party
No, they can't. No. They ain't trying to take no chances because the latest poll, first of all, there was an early poll that showed Beto O'Rourke was down by 9 to Ted Cruz. New poll that came out shows it's a dead heat. You got Democrats who are up in Arizona. You got Tennessee.
But that just takes it down to maybe 50.
No. Here's my whole point. Mitch McConnell ain't trying to chance Jack. His whole deal is let's get all this stuff before November because we don't know what's going to happen in November. That's what he's doing. He wants to rush this. They want Kavanaugh to be confirmed. They want him to be sworn in and starting October 4th.
And they want him to be in a position to pardon the arrest.
Yeah, absolutely.
If they can.
Lauren, go.
The October 4 issue is huge if we hit Monday and that woman steps out
And
there.
she says she's
because
not showing
there's
up.
no way that Deborah Katz is going to let her step out there with anything less than what sounds a heck of a lot like the description of an attempted rape, unless, you know, there's no way Deborah Katz, as good of an attorney she is, going to allow that to happen if, in fact, she does step out and talk. And I think the optics of that for them are extremely difficult. And I think there's no way that she's going to testify and it's just going to be some scene of teen drunken revelry and then that's it. It's going to be something that hits the legal definition of
sexual assault.
Exactly. Sexual assault or rape.
Well,
and quite frankly, to get back to due process a minute, I mean, we've heard a lot of people on TV talking about how, and I believe, we should take these allegations very seriously.
Very seriously.
But frankly, I mean, in the black community, when I think about the Scottsboro Boys and Emmett Till and the Central Park Five, I believe strongly in due process. I know it's not going to play out that way neatly. It's going to play out in the press because the way these things happen is people show up, they contact reporters, and the press ends up being the impetus of an investigation. I totally understand that. But I do think, even though I'm not a Kavanaugh fan, that he has a right to tell his side just as she does.
Well, he does have a right to tell his side.
Final comment. Final comment.
You know, the alcohol use as a young person suggests that he don't know his side. He doesn't know what's going on. No, but look at his yearbook.
What we know,
the beer club.
The press.
Look at
which is fine, but we don't know that yet.
Well, Laura, I get you with due process, but I also get the fact that women have not been believed consistently.
I get it.
And we really do need to pay attention to this woman.
We understand
and we know that there are holes in his story. And when his boy, if his boy,
justice or we don't,
if his boy refuses to testify, that's telling you something right there. If the guy who was in the room says he cannot testify, that tells you everything you need to know.
No, as a Republican woman voter, I'm looking at
an investigation.
But I'm looking at
I don't know anything through the press. We need an investigation.
I don't disagree with you about an investigation, but I think your insistence on so-called due process, and I say so-called.
As African Americans, we more than anybody should believe in due process. We know that there's been extrajudicial justice in this country. I know you know that better than anybody, right? I believe that both sides, we should know both sides of the story.
Well, then let
clearly
the FBI investigate and let the Republicans stop saying we want to wait, we want to wait, we want to wait, we want to wait, or we got to vote up or down.
I agree.
If they did Anita Hill, and she had no idea that her name was even in the hopper. She had no clue.
True.
And they just came, like I said, she's teaching her class, minding her business, little professor in the middle of nowhere, and here come the FBI upending her life.
Right.
So they could do the same.
As a Republican woman,
Go ahead.
I think that women like me are looking at that, and white women are looking at her, and they're seeing themselves in her. And while I completely agree with you, we need to have due process, but what kind of process do we have? It's really boiled down to he says one thing, she said another. And if she doesn't show up, and if she doesn't show up, the Republicans, because it's politically expedient, they're going to move forward so they can get their Supreme Court justice. But white Republican women, I believe they're going to consider this issue, and they're certainly going to consider this issue at the midterm.
They're underwater with white Republican women. See, they're in big trouble, and this thing that plays out Monday is huge trouble.
White Republican women are going to bounce back behind this. If this
here's the
woman is
deal.
not heard, white women are going to be livid. And it's about time.
Well, I don't know. I don't know because we thought white women were going to be pissed off when the Access Hollywood tape came out.
No, because explain that away. If he was to say the joke, this is a real white woman.
No.
This is a living, breathing white woman. This could be their sister, their mother, their best friend. I think this is different than the Hollywood Access.
The man said all kind of stuff about women during the campaign, and them same white women went out there hollering, "Protect my Second Amendment right to a gun," and they voted for him.
Julian is right. When you have a specific person stepping out with a face and identity, it's a little bit different than the abstract woman.
All right, I guess y'all trusted white women way more than I am. I ain't trusting white women that much.
Look, my mama is a white woman. I'm telling you, my mom is a white woman. My sister's a white woman.
I don't trust them either, but I do think that there's some buttons with them that you can push.
All right.
Rape and attempted rape is one of them.
Again, my mama is a white woman. My half sisters are white women.
That would be called your business.
They are. Look, I'm telling you. I'm telling you.
Y'all know. All right.
White women.
Okay,
they
we'll
think
see.
About this.
We'll see what we'll see
I'm a resident expert on some white women.
We'll
in particular,
see. Yeah, okay.
My mama and my sister.
We'll see what Becky and Margaret do. We'll see.
It's big.
All right, y'all. Today in Illinois, Jeff Sessions spoke before at the Valor, Survive, and Thrive conference in Waukegan, Illinois. Now, if you want to understand why this man don't give a damn about black people, you ought to see this particular speech. Now, we don't have the video of it. I'm definitely going to be looking for it, but here is his actual words. What he did was he, first of all, went through this long explanation in this video, in this speech, about how violent crime was down, but then how all of a sudden in Chicago, how the murder numbers jumped up. He goes, 765 people were killed in Chicago, the most the city has seen in 20 years. Over the previous decade before the consent decree, the average was 454. Now, mind you, the start of this is when he said, in the aftermath, the city's leadership rushed into, no, let me start here. He says, in 2014, the police here came under intense criticism. A year later, the ACLU issued a report on stop and frisk in Chicago and threatened the city of Chicago with a lawsuit. And the politicians went into retreat. And so he then goes on to talk about how because of this consent decree, Chicago saw the biggest single-year increase in the murder rate since we've had reliable statistics, which is over 60 years. And then he said more people were murdered in Chicago in 2016 than in New York and Los Angeles combined, even though Chicago has 1/5 of the population of those two cities. And then he goes, so what happened? He says that basically, he said that cops stopped patrolling. And then he cites a study that was done and the victims and the staggering cost of crime. And then he goes on and on. Then he goes, after the consent decree was pushed by the ACLU, went into effect in 2016, these stops declined by 75%. Chicago police made 24% fewer arrests. Then he goes on and on and on. Then he says, but tragically, it was not obvious to the politicians, the media, or the activists. And then he called this the ACLU effect. In essence, he writes here, folks, let me blow this thing up. He says, but the disastrous consent decree is still in effect all throughout this speech. Then he goes on to Freddie Gray in Baltimore. He goes on saying how consent decrees are bad and how they don't work and how we should pull back from them. This is a white man from Alabama who, I don't give a damn what he put in this speech about the victims and the impact. Jeff Sessions does not give a damn about the citizens of Chicago, of New York, or any other place. He is all about protecting cops. And the reason he's full of it is because when they went after stop and frisk in New York, and then when they got them to stop doing it, there was no dramatic increase in crime in New York City because they knew stop and frisk was BS. What Jeff Sessions refuses to do is to hold cops accountable in Chicago and tell them, learn to do your damn job without beating people, without lying on people, without erasing evidence, and without running roughshod. That's the fundamental problem in Chicago is these cops said, if you don't let us do what we've always done, then we're going to stop policing. Mm-hmm. That's the reason why crime has gotten out of control, not the consent decree.
That's absolutely right, Roland. Beyond that, I mean, let's remember this man's middle name, Beauregard. Let's just remember that because it really does speak to his connections to the Civil War, to the Confederacy. And what he is an unapologetic Confederate in a number of ways. And so he really does believe that the police should run roughshod over our communities.
We believe that law enforcement is a noble profession and one that demands respect. And he goes, of course, the Department of Justice will continue to hold accountable any officer who violates the law and undermines the good work of our police, but we will not malign entire police departments. We will not try to micromanage their daily work all the way from Washington. But let's talk about Cleveland, who's under its second consent decree in less than 20 years. Talk about when Ramsey was in Philadelphia, who called the DOJ in to investigate the problem in the police department. Talk about Mitch Landrieu, who was the mayor of New Orleans, who called in the DOJ to say, please investigate the corrupt New Orleans police department. That's my point. But what you have here is a man who is saying, oh, no, it's just that single cop over there, when in fact, no, this is a department culture. In Chicago, a judge in Chicago said, I got cops purposely lying on the witness stand. And I know they lying. He referred 8 of those cops to be investigated, and the Police Accountability Board didn't investigate any of them. This is a sitting judge who's saying, I know they lying. That ain't some single cop. Laquan McDonald's on trial right now. The cops went to the Burger King and erased the video. That's not a single cop. Liz, that's culture.
Yeah. I mean, he's indefensible. Like, there's no way that I can sit here and say that what he's doing is the right thing. I mean, you know, I have sons who have been racially profiled. My father has been racially profiled. And, you know, just get away from the party politics. This is a very real issue that is not just harming the African-American community, but we're losing lives behind police brutality. And I understand the point to say that, you know, we got to support our police officers, which is true, but we don't have to support police officers just with a random blanket because of law enforcement. It has to be the right type of law enforcement, the community policing that we need in our communities. I'm from Baltimore. We're under a consent decree. Recently, there was a video of a police officer punching in the face another police officer who was in plain clothes, who was off duty at that time. I mean, I recall from 20 years ago that they stabbed a man in Lexington. A man had a knife in Lexington Market, world famous Lexington Market, and they shot him 70 times in the middle of the street. This is going on and on.
The reason Cleveland is under a consent decree because you had a cop who stood on top of a car. They fired more than 100 shots into a police car. When they went in, they found massive corruption in the department. But take that. This is his last line. And so in our joint effort to protect the good people of this city and this country, you can be certain about this. We have your backs and have our thanks. Please, I want to see Jeff Sessions come and give this speech to the NAACP.
He can't do that.
I want to see Jeff Sessions come to the Urban League. I want to see Jeff Sessions come and nan a Rainbow Push. No, but here's the deal, though. I want to see Jeff Beauregard Sessions stand in front of activists and people who are impacted by police and try to give this speech, but he only does it in front of cops.
But you know, the thing here, Roland, is that if you look at what's happened, let's just...
Julianne, then Lauren.
Take back just a step to look at Kerner, because it's 50 years since Kerner. The two things that they said were responsible for the riots, uprisings, police brutality and white racism.
Yes.
People have looked at
every
everything
case
else but police brutality and white racism. And the fact is that until we look at police brutality and root it out, until that little Amber Geiger human being is up under somebody's jail, until we can just call the roll of until these things happen, he just needs to shut up. He needs to shut up and go away.
Lauren.
This is always a touchy topic for me because my father was in law enforcement, and my nephew and several cousins, and soon to be my niece. And I'm not a Jeff Sessions fan by any stretch of the imagination, but when we talk about individual cases with regard to brutality, his point with regard to not blanketing the entire profession or an entire department is a point that has to be remembered only when you're adjudicating the case, because you do have to you do have to prosecute specific officers. The more complicated piece that you brought up with regard to the culture on a particular force like Chicago is always harder to get to because you still have to prosecute each person as an individual. But I understand what you're saying. I mean, these things go back to Fred Hampton. I mean, we have so much evidence about
and the thing. Hold on one second. Hold on. Go ahead. Finish your point.
I was just going to say we have so much evidence that in fact there is some conspiratorial behavior.
But the problem that I have here, the problem that I have here is that when Trump won, Jeff Sessions tried to go into Baltimore, into federal court, to undermine that consent decree. This was a consent decree that the city agreed with. The police chief agreed with. But this wasn't like, okay, the city is against it. They were being forced because of a lawsuit. No. But he wanted to, he does not want any federal oversight of departments when the reality is who else can come in with the power of the law to say you are going to do the things right? And what these cops want to do is they want to keep taking shortcuts. They want to keep beating folks. They want to keep lying. They want to keep erasing evidence. And yes, there are absolute good cops. There are absolute cops doing the right thing. But when you have case after case after case after case after case after case, we got a problem. Lawn Julian.
That's why your point with regard to stop and frisk in New York is a point very well taken. Why the ACLU did have that class action, because when you have 600,000 individuals in the city of New York stopped and frisked in one freaking year, 92% of whom were black and Latino, there is your incredible evidence. And of course, the mayor at the time, Rudy Giuliani, I mean,
and then after him, Mike Bloomberg, who defended stop and frisk vigorously.
They sat there, like you said, and said, it'll bring down crime.
No, hold on. Not only that, they said, they went to the court. If we get rid of stop and frisk, crime is going to escalate all across New York. That's going to be murder and mayhem. And what happened?
And they were wrong.
And they were all wrong.
Totally
But here's the deal. The difference is they kept policing in New York. The problem in Chicago, and we've seen it because it happened in Baltimore. They said,
if we can't have
you're going to prosecute the Freddie Gray cops?
You're going to slow down.
Oh, okay. We ain't going to do a damn thing. So as opposed to Jeff Sessions saying, no matter what happens, you always do your job, what he's saying is, it's in his speech.
No, he said,
it's in his speech where he says they slow down.
It's about the political power of the union over politicians.
Yeah.
You see that piece.
But here's the other piece of it. Under President Obama, under President Bush, we got all kinds of military crap into cities. If you looked at Ferguson, why were there tanks in Ferguson?
This was 9/11.
Right, I got it.
But President Obama tried to roll that back. Sessions says, no, I want them to have all this stuff. So this man really is about criminalizing black people, militarizing our communities, and he's not even apologetic about it. So when we look at the roots of the thing and look at what he'd like to do, yes, he'd like to reduce the number of consent decrees. He would not like to enforce them, but he'd also like to remilitarize the police, something that President Obama attempted to dial back.
He wants no oversight whatsoever. It's simple.
But oversight to put their weapons in their rope. He wants to do that.
He wants them to have free reign to do what they want, because in his minds, these folks, these people of color, should all be thrown in jail. That's why he's fighting Trump on the criminal justice reform bill. That's why he's mad as hell at his son-in-law on that whole deal, because that's what Jared Kushner, and that's why Senator Tom Cotton has replaced him as the chief bigot in the United States Senate, who's blocked it, who is sick out of his own mouth. Tom Cotton has said, we need more folks in prison.
You know, after talking with Jared Kushner about this effort that he's leading with criminal justice, I have a feeling that Jeff Sessions has met his match on that one. I think they're going to be able to pass something.
He has.
It's going to be up to more Grassley, in a way, than Sessions.
Right.
But at any rate, the point is something should actually pass.
Absolutely. All right, folks, let me also go to this right now. First of all, we're going to go to our HBCU Giving Day. So let's go ahead and roll that, please. All right, folks. So, again, the shout out our school today. Spelman College, of course, founded in 1881, located in Atlanta. BestColleges.com ranked Spelman among the top 20 best women's colleges in 2016. If you want to give and support Spelman, be sure to go to www.spelman.edu. www.spelman.edu. Folks, we talked about what's happening on Capitol Hill. One of the issues that people totally ignore, but it is literally billions and billions and billions of dollars. And that is what is in the Farm Bill. Now, you might think, y'all might like, okay, Roland, black people, farm, well, look, we ain't farming. But no, the food programs in America are located in the Farm Bill. Well, last week we got a chance to catch up with Janice Mathis, of course, with the National Council of Negro Women. And she, of course, was in the hearing where they were talking about that. And she lays out the importance of why we, African Americans, must pay attention to this Farm Bill going through Congress. Well, Janice, here's what's interesting. I was reading the November 2017 issue of Vanity Fair, and they had this story, and it was called Inside Trump's Cruel Campaign Against USDA's Scientists. And they also had another story about the Department of Agriculture and about how most people have no clue about the Department of Agriculture and where most of our food programs in America reside there. And at one point, they wanted to change the kind of food folks got, sort of had these little kits or whatever, and people were going, what is wrong with y'all? And you have people who are running who were saying, oh, no, that's enough food for a family of four.
It reminds you of Ronald Reagan at one point wanted to make ketchup a vegetable as part of an effort to cut back on the cost of school lunches. Very mean-spirited. Now, we can give the biggest tax cut in recent memory, and we want to pay for it with food stamps. We spent the day yesterday on the Hill in a hearing. House has passed a bill, draconian, new work requirements, all kinds of new strings attached to getting food stamps. Senate has passed a different bill that is more reasonable, more moderate. They've appointed a committee of conferees to reconcile the two bills. That hearing went on and on and on. It was remarkable to me that in a country where 1 out of every 5 children in this rich country are food insecure, that we could be talking about cutting back on SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Why is it in the Farm Bill? Because it's good for farmers. Think about it. Every time we give a family a food stamp, what can they buy with it? One thing only, and that is food. Who are they buying it from? Essentially from farmers and grocers. So it pays dividends in terms of supporting farm prices, which is one of the aims of the legislation that's being considered. It also helps children do better in school because if they got better nutrition, you're talking about taking 2 million people off of food stamps. That is immoral, and it's unnecessary.
So paint me a picture. First of all, when you text me, you said no press was here.
No press. You're not going to hear this story nowhere but on Roland Martin Unfiltered.
Now, the other piece is how many folk who don't look like us, who don't work on Capitol Hill, how many of them were in the room?
Oh, there were dozens. There were 150 people in the room.
But see, I'm making the case that, look, it's more broke, poor, hungry white folks in America than black folks and Latinos. Where are these white evangelicals?
More than half of all food stamp recipients are not African Americans or Latinos.
Right, and it amazes me that when it comes to fighting for these programs, we understand the importance of it, but then you have these folks out here, and then Trump supposedly caring about the white working class, saying the people who have forgotten, and these are the folks showing up at his rallies, saying, oh, no, we down with you. And I'm like, do y'all understand? He's about to jack y'all?
You couldn't be more right. I pulled some numbers looking at where the conferees, the House and Senate members come from. Places like Texas and Oklahoma, places where ain't a whole lot of people that look like me. But 70 to 80% of those SNAP recipients in those states and congressional districts are white folk. Not only that, 70% of them, 60, 70% of them work. So it's not a poverty program. It's an American dream program. There's no reason why anybody should be hungry, much food as we throw away, that anybody should be walking around wondering where their next meal is coming from. That's what the hearing was about. I got to give it to Marsh Fudge was there as a conferee. Ms. Adams was there as a conferee. David Scott from Georgia, fighting on behalf of not just black folk, because this is really not a race issue.
Right.
This is really about people. In Fudge's district,
I keep saying broke is broke.
And they were talking about, well, they're not working. They're working low-income jobs. Mm-hmm. If you're old enough, you can remember they work every day. They clean the bodies of the sick. They wipe the bodies of the sick. When they get sick, they can't afford to lie in the bed that they make up every day. It's those folk that we're fighting for today, and until they get this farm bill passed, it only comes up once every 5 years.
So I remember I was on the plane, and I'm reading this story, and they're quoting individuals in this story, in this Vanity Fair story, who are talking about how effective the food program was. In fact, one part of the story was a trip because they said there's a particular bank. There's this billion-plus bank that resides in the Department of Agriculture, whose job is to build projects in many towns that private companies wouldn't want to build. And there were a number of companies, number of towns in America where they had things that were rebuilt, initiatives that were funded, that banks would not fund, that revitalized those towns. And those are the same folks who voted against Obama, who said throw him out, and Trump is literally trying to whack all of those programs. And these folks are just sitting here saying, oh, that's going to make America great again.
They're not really saying that. When they think about it, when you go to rural America, rural parts of Alabama and Mississippi and Kentucky and other places, Mitch McConnell was there today. He was there defending food stamps and food programs because He understands who those programs are
because he represents some broke white folks in Kentucky. Congressman Tim Clyburn has his Clyburn Amendment where he wants any bill passed in Congress, 10% of the resources to go to those counties where 20% or more of the people have lived below the poverty line for 30 years. Of the 400 counties that qualify, nearly 2/3 are in Republican congressional districts.
Well, that is absolutely true. Now, David Scott had an interesting proposal, and that was $5 million a year to the 19 historically black colleges and universities that are land-grant institutions that have as part of their mission farm and agriculture research to do STEAM and STEM scholarships for those students at those HBCUs. That's the kind of common sense legislation. Now, for right now, that proposal for some $95 million worth of aid to HBCUs is in the bill. It's in the Senate version of the bill. Can it stay there? Will it remain there? That's why we need people to contact their members of Congress and let them know, don't cut food stamps, don't put strings attached to it, and fund this program for HBCUs.
Well, it's critically important. And again, this is one of those things that, let's just be honest, broadcast networks won't talk about unless somehow this thing bubbles up into a huge fight. Cable news is going to ignore it because they're spending all their time talking about Bob Woodward's book, what's happening with Kavanaugh. But this is the kind of issue that happens on Capitol Hill every single day that folks ignore, that impacts real people, folks who are out there trying to bust their butt to try to make it happen in this country, trying to feed their families. And you have members of Congress who literally, especially on the House side, they just want to whack the heck out of this farm bill budget. And they want to pretty much say, the hell with these folks, y'all figure your own way out. And we're talking about feeding people, the most basic fundamental thing in a nation where we are paying people, which we also call welfare, not to grow food.
Not to grow crops.
But that's called subsidies.
That's what a big part of the debate today was about, the supplements that will go to the farmers who will let their land lie idle while to keep the farm price supports up.
All right, Janice Mathis, we appreciate it. Thanks a bunch.
All right, thank you.
All right, folks. And so right now, here's our quote of the day. There we go.
I learned to speak when I should have been silent. Law professor Lonnie Grenier.
All right, folks, one of our elders has passed away. Arthur Mitchell, the founding artistic director of the Dance Theater of Harlem, has died at the age of 84 due to complications of heart failure. He's one of the most popular dancers with the New York City Ballet in the 1950s and 1960s, and his passion and artistry paved the way for many black dancers, and certainly our prayers go out to Arthur Mitchell and his family, and of course his extended family of all the dancers who have come through his particular company. All right, folks, don't forget to always support Roland Martin Unfiltered by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. We need you to join our Bring the Funk fan club. We want to thank all the folks who are contributors of our charter charter club. This is how we're able to make this show go, support every single day. In the first couple of weeks, we've had more than 3 million views of our show, plus our clips, and so we certainly thank all of you. Don't forget you can share as soon as this show is over. As soon as we go off on Facebook, YouTube, and Periscope, you can actually watch this on demand. We also restream the show every single day at 10 p.m., 2 a.m., 6 a.m., and 10 a.m. as well. Tomorrow I'll be broadcasting live from the YouTube headquarters in New York. I got to head to New York to interview Tiffany Haddish and Kevin Hart for their new movie, Night School. And so I'll be seeing you from New York. Y'all be sure to have a great night. Holla!